So here I am with another technical video, and this time it is going to be about troubleshooting and understanding your motorcycle brakes. So this topic is applicable to any of the motorcycles. It does not matter if it's 20 years old or a brand new motorcycle out of the showroom. First, let me explain how motorcycle brakes work. Here we go. This is a brake lever. This exercises pressure onto something known as a piston. Now this piston is there inside something known as a master cylinder. Now this master cylinder generates hydraulic pressure with the help of hydraulic fluid, and the hydraulic fluid goes through the brake hoses. Now these are the brake hoses. In case you have one disc, you will have one hose. If you have two discs, you will have two hoses. They will go all the way down here and they will get to this area, and this area is known as a caliper. Now caliper would have pistons inside again and are known as slave cylinders. Now this, what you see here, these are slave cylinders. This is known as a master cylinder, which generates the hydraulic pressure, and the pressure is transferred to the slave cylinders through the brake hoses. Now inside the slave cylinders are pistons, and the pistons move forward when you press the brake lever. Alright, and the pistons put pressure onto your brake pads, and the brake pads put pressure onto your disc rotor. Now what happens is that when your brake pads get in contact with the disc rotor, they generate friction, and that friction slows down your motorcycle. Now I have heard many of my friends say that my brakes on my motorcycle are not working fine. Now let us understand what can be the different kind of issues on motorcycle brakes. Now if your motorcycle is new and if brakes are not up to satisfactory level, what can you do? And what are the different kind of issues that we face? The most common issue that I've heard from my friends is that my brakes feel spongy. Sponginess on brakes means when you pull the brake lever back, you got to feel that feedback, that there is level of pressure that is getting generated, because these are hydraulic brakes. Now when you pull it back, it is even supposed to go back in the same manner, that is free flow. It is supposed to be stiff and also go back in a free flow manner. If that is not happening, your brakes are known as spongy brakes. Just like how you press on sponge, you know how you feel it, it is not crisp, right? It is just saggy. So if that is the case, how do you check your brakes? Now sponginess on a brakes has to be with the master cylinder. And now what is a master cylinder? I'll show that to you. Here we go. This part where the brake lever is attached, and here if you take a look, this is the end of the brake lever which produces the pressure when you pull back the lever. Now where is the brake lever producing the pressure? It is producing the pressure onto the master cylinder. This is what is known as a master cylinder. And now this one is not an integrated master cylinder. This master cylinder has an external brake fluid reservoir. Now this is where our brake fluid is poured into, and from here the brake fluid gets into the master cylinder from the top. However, many motorcycles which are not sport kind, which are naked motorcycles or in general, have an integrated master cylinder like what the Duke or the RC 390 have, where the reservoir would not be external but it would be on the top of the master cylinder like a tank. Now let us talk about what are the parts that a master cylinder has. Very simple, as a matter of fact. Take a look here. This area that I have shown where the brake lever is pressing against, this is a piston which is there inside the master cylinder. Now understand the word, this is known as a cylinder, right? So it needs to have a piston. So here is the piston. When you press this, what happens is that the hydraulic fluid which is inside gets pushed and there is a pressure generated. Now that pressure goes through the brake hoses, the brake lines. I'll get back to it next. So in case your piston which is there inside, now this piston, how does it make sure that the hydraulic fluid does not leak out? It has O-rings and it has rubber around it, and it also has a spring. Now in case your O-ring along with time is wearing out, or if your spring loses its tension, that is a time when your brakes become spongy. Now in case your brakes become spongy, the best way what you can do is, the first thing is do brake fluid bleeding. That is, as I mentioned, there is hydraulic fluid here. Okay, in case you don't know how to do it, consult an experienced mechanic and ask him to do brake fluid bleeding. I'll get back to the topic now. And in case brake fluid bleeding does not resolve the problem where your brakes are still spongy, that means your master cylinder needs a replacement. However, master cylinders are not always cheap. For example, the master cylinder on this Yamaha R1, or for that case even an imported motorcycle like the Ninja 650, or I think even the Ninja 300 would be very expensive, sometimes about 15, 20, 30, 40,000 rupees. So in those cases, you don't have to buy a brand new master cylinder, but you can buy a master cylinder rebuild kit. Now what happens, as I showed this to you, that the master cylinder is only a metal big cylinder, a piece. In a kit you would get a new piston, you would get the O-rings, and you would get the rubber kit and also a new spring. So all that you have to do is open up the master cylinder and replace those pieces inside. So in case your rubber is worn out, or your spring is worn out, or your O-ring is worn out, then replacing them with new kit would resolve the problem of your brakes being spongy. Now I'm going to speak about brake effectiveness. After you have resolved issues like brake master cylinder being spongy, and you still don't feel that your brakes are spot on, like for example if you're riding and you touch the brake lever, and you still don't feel that initial bite, or you don't feel that when you pull the brake lever back, your motorcycle is not slowing down as well as it should, I'll tell you what to do. Now, you have resolved the issue of the brake being spongy by either getting a new master cylinder or by getting a master cylinder rebuild kit. Fine, that part is done. Now, the hydraulic pressure here is generating well, but the brake fluid that is going from the brake hoses to the calipers. Now, what is happening is that there could be two issues. Issue number one is that when you have done bleeding on your brakes, as I mentioned, that it should be generally done by someone who's got experience, but again, DIYs come with experience, correct? You got to keep doing it. So anyhow, coming to the topic, when you've done bleeding on your brakes, there could be air bubbles trapped inside your hydraulic fluid inside the braking system. Now, remember, hydraulic fluid generates pressure because it is incompressible. I think I'm using the correct word. Basically, it cannot be compressed at all. So, for example, air, if you take a lot of air and compress it, it becomes much smaller area, correct? And if you take water and compress it, it becomes much smaller. But hydraulic fluid, if you take 100 ml of it and compress it, if you put tons of weight, it will still remain that much. So that is the reason hydraulic fluid is used in brakes, because it can transfer the pressure put on one end to the other end without getting compressed. Now, when there is hydraulic fluid in your brake lines and in your braking system, if it even contains air bubbles, what happens is that the hydraulic fluid would not compress, but your air bubble will compress. So when the air bubble compresses, all the great job that your master cylinder is doing, the hydraulic fluid is doing, everything goes for a toss. And that is when, no matter how hard you pull the lever back, what is happening now, when you pull it back, the air bubble which is trapped inside is getting compressed, and it is not able to transfer the hydraulic pressure to the brake pads here through the calipers and the pistons inside. So what you can do is, in case you feel that even after pulling the brake lever back, the brakes are not effective enough, get your bleeding done by a very experienced technician and make sure that there are no air bubbles trapped inside at all, not even a single air bubble. And use good hydraulic fluid. I use Motul .4 hydraulic fluid. It's absolutely worth it. If you use cheap hydraulic fluid, one is that it might not be able to generate enough pressure. Two, you don't want to keep bleeding your brakes every 6 months, correct? You don't actually have to do it for years. So using good hydraulic fluid even make sure that the internals of your brake master cylinders, slave cylinders, they remain corrosion free, and also the fluid does not kind of become bad in a short period, so it can go on for years and years. So after doing all of this, if you still don't find the initial bite or the effectiveness on your brakes, that means one thing. Or if your motorcycle is absolutely brand new and if you still don't find effectiveness or initial bite on your brakes, it means that your brake pads are not of good quality or they are worn out. So what you can do is, if your brake pads are new and you don't find that effectiveness, then go and upgrade your brake pads to a good level brake pads. I personally suggest HH grade brake pads, double H. I swear by EBC HH brake pads. If you can get them for your motorcycle, go buy them, and they last for a long time, and awesome brake bite you get from them. Or in case your brakes were initially nice, the brake pads, and after a few thousand kilometers they are not as good as you like them to be, that means your brake pads are worn out. Simply replace them. Now, after doing all of this, if you still don't find your brakes to be good, or if you're losing hydraulic pressure, there could be two reasons. One is, generally most of the motorcycles come with rubber brake lines, right? Like the KTM RC 390 and Duke fortunately come with steel braided lines. But in case you have rubber brake lines, what happens is that when the hydraulic pressure is produced by the master cylinder, the rubber brake lines can expand like this. The moment you press this, the brake line can expand little bit, at a very micro level. That means the moment it expands, you are losing hydraulic pressure, and enough hydraulic pressure is not getting transferred to your brake caliper, and it's not going forward to the brake pad. So what I suggest is that in that case, upgrade your brake lines to steel braided brake lines, because steel braided brake lines don't expand when you put pressure from the master cylinder. Another point that I would like to mention is that keep checking your brakes from top to bottom, all the way, everywhere, for any leakages of hydraulic fluid. Even if you find one drop of hydraulic fluid that is leaking, of course your brake won't be effective, and also it is a matter of risk, because if the hydraulic fluid gets onto your disc rotor, then that can be dangerous because your brakes would not work anymore. Alright, now I'm going to speak about something when your brakes are completely done up, they are working awesome, everything is fine. But what can happen is that when your disc rotors are considerably old, say 5, 6, 7 years or 10 years old, then something known as speed wobble can happen. And that can happen because rust can form on your disc rotors. Very, very nano level rust. So in case that is there, when you start braking, the nano level rust creates uneven braking onto the disc rotor, and that can cause the front brake, the front wheel to wobble. And if it happens on high speeds, it can lead to a tank slapper also. So I suggest that check your disc rotors really well, and in case there is any rust, polish it off with rust removal cream, and also maintain your disc rotors with brake cleaning fluid, like you get good brake cleaners. I can check on, let you know, a few brands, but never put any kind of oil, or for that case even kerosene or diesel or petrol, and clean your brakes, because they will end up leaving a residue, and that residue will kill your braking efficiency. So buddies, I'm done with the video, and it's a long video because technical videos cannot be short, and I hope I've covered all the points. And in case you feel that you have some points which we all should know, please comment so that we all together can make motorcycling a safer thing to do. And also remember, hydraulic fluid levels should always be checked. It should not be completely to the top, not to the bottom. It should be in between, and it should almost never go down. In case it's going down, don't think that it's just evaporating. It should not evaporate. It should not get consumed. The only way it can go down is leakage. So in case you see that the hydraulic fluid is going down, say once in few months or in few days, or that matter even in 1 year, that means there is a small level of leakage from somewhere, and that needs to be checked. And also the same process that I mentioned about the replacement of pistons on the master cylinder, the same thing can be done to the caliper also, because caliper also has slave cylinders and pistons inside. So those pistons can also rust, because pistons are not fully in on the caliper. Pistons are slightly out. So the area which is outside can rust. So in case it's badly rusted, and also the area inside, in case the rubber O-ring is kind of gone bad with age, then what you can do is you can do a rebuild on your calipers. You can get the pistons out, polish them well, clean them up, put new O-rings, put them back, and your calipers would start working really well. Has to do with the master cylinder on a motorcycle. Yeah.
Because of this planet much better.
Yeah. Do some style also. Record?
Yeah.
Now I'm going to speak about brake. One second. Now I'm going to speak about brake effectiveness.